If you could bring one animal back from the dead, would you? What about a whole pack? In fact, what about a whole species? Good morning, I'm Alexandra Prevost.
My name is Reagan Osland.
I'm Emmett Whitaker.
I'm Gabriella Valentin.
I'm Miguel Rubio.
Today, we'll be talking to you about de-extinction.
So what is de-extinction?
De-extinction is the scientific utilization of techniques such as selective breeding, gene editing, or cloning to bring back animals from the dead.
With this background information in mind, we're brought to our research question. How do we justify the use of de-extinction in the 21st century? Our team has decided that the use of de-extinction in the 21st century can be justified through supporting conservation efforts, creating new and helpful scientific advancements, and prompting the creation of more animal rights laws.
An important lens to consider when talking about de-extinction is conservation. De-extinction and conservation are similar yet different and often lead to debates about how de-extinction could potentially affect conservation.
For example, the scientific researcher Leslie Ogden made this quote here on a TEDx talk at the National Geographic headquarters. To summarize, she states that the extinction could be, and conservation can be defined as a three-legged stool, one being protection, conservation, and revival. However, the introduction of the extinction were a fourth leg of revival.
In this graph, we have charted the findings of Colossal, America's largest de-extinction company, along with the findings of the National Wildlife Federation, America's largest conservation-based organization. As you can see, in 2021, Colossal raised $15 million in fundings, while the Wildlife Federation raised $118 million in fundings. However, in 2022, Colossal raised $90 million in fundings, while the Wildlife Federation raised $115 million in fundings. As of this year, 2023, Colossal has raised $150 million in fundings, as well while the Wildlife Federation has not yet released their numbers. It can still be assumed that they have never reached Colossal's high standard of $150 million in a single year. De-extinction is new, yet is still gaining funding, while conservation loses funding. If this continues, conservation organizations should begin to decrease in fundings and support, which may lead to the extinction of species that are commonly protected by these organizations. While there are a lot of arguments against de-extinction when it comes to conservation, Josh Donlan, prominent ecologist and conservation, suggests that these might only be moral hazard arguments with no solid evidence to back them up. For example, studies have shown that conservation is not commonly supported by the public, and that de-extinction might just be the flashy new thing that can drive people to help support conservation. Another topic that we need to discuss is that
Furthermore, Leslie Falk, professor of political theory and the director of sustainability studies at the University of Florida, writes, de-extinction projects are only to be undertaken when there is expectation of a positive benefit for conservation, such as increasing ecosystem resilience or reducing further loss of biodiversity. This shows us that even if de-extinction efforts earn more funding than conservation efforts, ultimately de-extinction efforts will only be undertaken if they support conservation. So one could argue the funding for de-extinction projects ultimately practically go back to conservation, with the argument that de-extinction projects will earn more supporters and funding for conservation, and that de-extinction projects will only go through if they support conservation. Then it is obvious that de-extinction will ultimately have a positive and supportive impact on conservation.
There are several reasons why scientists and other professionals may discourage de-extinction. Shown on the screen is a quote from the National Geographic saying that extinction is a part of life and evolution for a reason, as it allows for the development of new species. So if this extinction is implemented, the emergence of new species will be threatened. Those species may be vital both for us and the ecosystem and environment, and it could even affect our food and climate.
Another important de-extinction is at its core a scientific advancement. So when considering lenses to look at de-extinction through, we must consider a scientific one, as it will give us further insight into how de-extinction could affect the world.
Author and environmentalist Frederick Rich says, restoration of these extinct species may be the most effective way to heal the damaged biotic system. The woolly mammoth is a prime example of this. By trampling and grazing, the woolly mammoth played a big role in the maintenance of the grassy cap that insulated the permafrost of the Great Northern Tundra. These large creatures caused the grassy cap to decline and the grassland to become mossy taiga, allowing the thawing of the permafrost and the release of greenhouse gases in mass volumes. This allows the idea that bringing back previously extinct species may be smarter than introducing new ones, because we already know what these extinct species may have on the effect of the ecosystem, while new species are unknown and unpredictable.
Another topic that we need to bring up is the rate of biodiversity loss. The rate of biodiversity loss is not slowing despite global commitments, and the depletion of animal species can reduce the stability of ecological communities. De-extinction, through its core, is a gene editing process. So when it creates new animals brought back from extinction, typically they will have genes that are almost completely similar to each other, which can have detrimental effects for the biodiversity of this species, and can cause several different genetic variations. If we're focusing on biodiversity loss, then the extinction may be causing worse problems, and we need to focus more on preserving biodiversity than at the extinction at this time.
But de-extinction might not be all bad for biodiversity. In fact, it might even help diversify a species gene pool in the future. Leslie Paul, professor of political theory and the director of sustainability studies at the University of Florida, tells us experimental efforts are now underway to rescue or recreate nature employing highly sophisticated technologies. These endeavors are not aimed at satisfying basic human needs or serving economic interests. Their goal is the conservation of biodiversity and ecological restoration. This quote shows us that as of now, de-extinction efforts are already finding ways to create more biodiversity and fund de-extinction projects. If we continue to support and fund de-extinction projects, we may find ways to not only bring biodiversity to the species that are being brought back, but it may also help with finding ways to create more biodiversity in general.
Another lens we should consider when talking about de-extinction is law. Since de-extinction is so new, there's a lot unknown about how the law will affect de-extinction projects and the animals that they bring back.
Many opponents of de-extinction argue that de-extinction is too new to be implemented well in law. Zoologist Jason Baumsteiger had a quote that we have on the screen, in which he says that in our government we have laws to protect the extinct species, but we do not have the laws or acts to define the extinct species. So if governments cannot define the extinct species, they do not have the capability to protect them. This could endanger both the extinction projects, backers, and the animals themselves.
Even if protection laws are created to include de-extinct species, Dr. Maureen Olsovin, professor of law at the University of Galloway, brings up the point that bioengineered animals may not fit these laws because their characteristics, genes, and appearances may not be consistent to what is protected under these laws. In fact, since these species are bioengineered, they may be able to be patented as inventions in the United States, since the Supreme Court held in 1890 that anything under the sun made by man is patentable, and technically speaking, these animals are made by man. If this is true, and these animals do fall under the patent laws, this could lead to disastrous effects, as these animals may be treated as inventions and not beings, and may not be protected under animal abuse laws.
So while there aren't specific laws that protect the extinct animals, there are some laws that could still apply to them. For example, in the United States, the extinct animals reintroduction could fall under the National Environmental Policy Act, requiring an environmental assessment and potentially a more detailed impact assessment. And in the European Union, reintroduction of cloned and genome-edited de-extinct animals would be governed by Directive 2001 TMP, which concerns deliberate release of GMOs into the wild. This requires preliminary notification by releasing the entity to authorities and a strict environmental risk assessment. So while this law isn't made in mind to protect the extinct animals, it could help protect the environment that they're being introduced in and make sure that these animals are compatible with the environment that they're being released into. This could also be the perfect introduction for government interference into the extinction projects.
While de-extinct animals may be covered by these indirect laws, groups like the Non-Human Rights Project are working to develop autonomy for animals, including animals brought back from extinction. If de-extinct projects and companies receive funding, they may be able to hire groups like the Non-Human Rights Project to help lobby and create laws that could help protect the extinct animals and maybe even regular animals too.
However, there are some limitations with our solutions. For example, there's no guarantee that species brought back won't be too successful and result in invasive species. Another limitation is that species brought back may be considered endangered and take away funds meant for conservation and real endangered species. Even though laws are still in development for de-extinction, as of now, these animals are left with no solid legal protections. Because of these limits, it is important when justifying de-extinction to only support it in cases where it does not impede on conservation efforts, can safely benefit scientific advancements and the environment, and when these animals are able to get some form of legal protection. De-extinction is a very nuanced issue, but the more we support it, the more solutions and protections will be developed. Thank you.
Just come together. All right, we'll start with you, Gab, and work our way across. Gab, give me one specific way that your thinking changed as a result of Alex's thinking or her findings.
Yeah, so Alex's thinking was on conservation, and my lens was on the ethics of de-extinction. And I really only had one claim about conservation in my IRR, but hers was able to kind of give me more perspective into how important it is, and that it's not just one piece of an argument. Conservation and de-extinction really kind of have to find a way to coexist. It's a bigger issue than I initially thought it was through my research because it wasn't as focused on conservation.
Okay, thank you. Rayan, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your understanding of the problem that you guys identified?
I would say that Gabby's did because they talked about the ethical view of it, which basically I went over the goods and the bads of it, and Gabby's also did, so it kind of tied into mine, which allowed me to broaden my views on it.
All right, thanks. Alex, what's an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' IRRs that you decided not to use in your presentation, and why?
So we decided to not use some of Gabby's claims because she talked about the ethics, but in our presentation we were mostly just going over the essential problem, and the ethics didn't really fit, so we decided to exclude her claims.
All right. Sorry, Miguel. Describe an argument from one of your peers' IRRs that makes you think differently about the solution that you guys came up with.
Well, in Gabby's IRR, which is ethical, it tied into mine into scientific, and in mine it involved more with data. So with mine, it was focused more on separating conservation with the extinction, and hers was more on just the extinction and if we should use it. So instead of mine, where if we should use it and what it will do, hers was more if we should even do it in the first place.
All right, thank you. And Emmett, if you had another team member, what perspective could they have reached that would have made a useful contribution to the project?
I feel like that we could have used, again, more of like an ethical approach to it, like to add to the limitations.
You guys are done. Breathe.